Start with the prayer in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. God our Father, we give you thanks and praise. This summer day, we ask that you bless all the young adults here in their lifelong journey of growing in union with you. We ask that they have deep appreciation for beauty, the fine arts, and the role it plays in Catholic culture. And we ask for patron saint of the Catholic Artists Guild to please pray for all of us during this talk. That would be Sancte Thoma Aquinas. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. The Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. All right, so we have a very beautiful audience here. And there is so much beauty. I mean, it's just, I don't know if I can handle it. It's just saturated with beauty. Yeah, and you know, the reason for that, it's not because you combed your hair, brushed your teeth, or put on makeup, this side of our makeup. It has to do with the transcendentals. It has to do with the fact that you're good, true, you have being, that you exist. So when Thomas is talking about beauty, he's talking in context of the other transcendentals. Of course, he thinks goodness and beauty are very much related. So let's talk about beauty, because beauty is one of those words. Sometimes we like to think it means the same thing as pretty, or that's nice, or think it's just a subjective term. But no, beauty is actually a very ancient concept, and ancient even before Thomas's time. And we see that Thomas is really putting two schools of thought together and adds his own contribution. But let's get to the definition. So in the Summa, we see that beauty is that which gives pleasure upon being seen. That which gives pleasure upon being seen. So when we're talking about being seen, obviously if you are looking at a beautiful painting, you're seeing it with your ocular senses, with your eyeballs, okay? But think too, seen is much broader than what you see with the naked eye. Seen is also dealing with your auditory senses, what you're taking in, okay? Being seen, taking in from the intellect. So it's not just bodily senses, but also the higher part of the soul. Now, when we talk about pleasure, of course, if you say thank you at Chick-fil-A, they'll say my pleasure. And so that's just something I like to do because it's what they have to do. But pleasure, you know, besides Chick-fil-A, pleasure has to deal with the light. And so, and I'm going to, before getting more into beauty, there are some concepts here that we have to go through. And pleasure being one of them, the parts of the soul being one, essence and existence, the categories, transcendentals, the soul, and art. So I talk about this because when we are doing philosophy and talking about important subjects like beauty, okay, you need some building blocks to talk about this. That's why my first days, philosophy in seminary, we're talking about the five senses. I'm thinking, why are we talking about this? But it's very important in philosophy. We take in information through our senses. If you're not doing that, that's not human. Okay, it's very objective to take things in. We have senses that's important. But we need to talk about some of these philosophical concepts. Of course, I think you guys have had some, Leo Severino was here last summer, I think, and talked a lot about intro to philosophy. Okay, so we talk about an essence, right? What a thing is, okay? A chair has chairness, okay? It's very much kind of like a substance, what something is. That's why when we talk about transubstantiation, that the whatness of bread is now the whatness of our Lord Jesus Christ. The essence, the substance changed. So in essence is what something is. In existence is that something is. Okay? That a thing is. That it has being. Okay? So we need to know, work with those type of terms to make sure that something has an essence. So in Dr. Feser's book, Beginner's Guide to Aquinas, a Tyrannosaurus Rex has an essence, okay, but it doesn't exist anymore, okay? Or like a unicorn, I'm not talking about narwhals, but like, Pegasus, that has an essence, you have an idea what it is, but it has never existed. So these terms are distinct. Now, God's essence is his existence, so on and so forth. And so that's what Dr. Feser goes through that book. So essence, what a thing is, existence, that a thing is. So that's one brick to have in our conversation. Another brick, too, before we get into the transcendentals, is this whole idea of categories. Okay? So Aristotle, who very much inspired St. Thomas Aquinas, had these 10 descriptive categories for something. So substance, like what a thing is, quantity, how much of it, quality, what is it like, relation, location, where it is, position, possession, action, pact. So these type of descriptive words are describing something, okay? Now, some concepts rise above these 10 categories, okay? Rise above quantity, quality, relation, location, because they can be said for anything that exists. And so we call these the transcendentals, okay? So transcendental, we get from Dr. Feser's book, is something above every genus, nominal being thus not restricted to any category. So you guys have an idea what the transcendentals are? Can you name a few of them? All right, Bueller. All right, goodness. Questions at the end. All right, Josh.
Beauty and truth.
Truth. Okay, do you want to take a stab at some other ones? Okay. All right. One. All right, thank you. So, look, beauty, truth, and goodness, I know it's, Wishburne does a lot with that, which is great because if that's going to get people in the church, wonderful. All right, but there's more transcendentals than beauty, truth, and goodness. And I'm like, no, stop leaving the other guys out. Please, just please. All right, so we have being, existence. We have thing, a being of some kind or another. We have oneness, a being distinct from other things. Something, a being among other beings. Now when we get true, I can email this to people, by the way. So Mateo, remind me about that. True deals with what's real. Good informs the ideal. Okay? Now, these fancy convertible, which probably won't be at the car show at the end of the month, these terms are convertible. If something has being, it's a thing. If something is one, it is true. If something is good, it has being. Right? Now, with Thomas, beauty is kind of it's more of a additional aspect of good. But whatever you say of beauty can also be said of being, thing, one, something, true, good. We'd find out it would be later theologians thinking like Thomas, like Jacques Maritain, who would argue that beauty is itself a transcendental, kind of on par with the others. But nonetheless, yes, you can say what's true, good, beautiful is also being, thing, one, or something. So, in transcendentals, they differ in sense, but not in reference. Okay, so when we talk about something is true, it's also beautiful and it's good. Okay, keep in mind, yes, you're talking about the same thing, but having different names. And so Dr. Feser uses the Superman example here, late Christopher Reeves, Clark Kent and Superman. All right, now the other brick that we need to talk about is the soul, because beauty is something that you're going to take delight in, and it's going to be talking about a higher part of the soul. So the soul is an animating principle. If my soul left my body right now, what would I be? Dead, thank you, dead. I'd be a corpse. You'd have to get another priest to replace me or not, but, so the soul separating from the body, that's death. The soul, is that principle that keeps us alive. Someone who's a corpse is not, a human being, that's the body of a human being, but the soul isn't there. Now, with the soul, there's different levels or different types of souls. So Aristotle would talk about the vegetative souls, so things that plants do. They take in nutrients and stuff. They exist. They don't move. It's not you're alive, but it is kind of primitive. The animal soul means you're using the senses. Okay. So vegetative soul, then the animal soul. Okay. Now we are human beings, right? So sorry for any PETA fans. Look, the fourth way in Thomas's 5 proofs of the existence of God is degrees of being, okay? As a human being, you are better than Fido, and you are better than a cactus, okay? You have more being, you have more dignity than a Venus flytrap, and don't forget it, okay? But an angel has more being than you do. But being made in the image and likeness of God, the fact that people can get married and procreate, sure, that's something angels don't do. So there is, something that we have that angels don't. Of course, angels are more pure form, but that's going a little off topic. But anyway, there's degrees of being here. But as a human being, you have these different parts of the soul. You have the vegetative part of the soul, nutrition, growth, reproduction. Animal part of the soul, sensation, okay? You can see, hear, touch. Rational part of the soul, the highest, deals with reason. And the way you can kind of think about that is with the parts of the body. There's reason you think in your mind, it's at the top, okay? So that's the way you think about it in the higher sense. All right. Now, the other thing that we deal with as human beings is these things, appetites, desires. And this is where we're talking about pleasure, okay? That we're dealing with something delightful. So a sensory appetite tends towards something concrete. So like a cheeseburger, okay? And wow, I'm salivating, I really want that. And there's a delight when you eat it, not so much when the heartburn kicks in later, but in the moment, it's heavenly. Okay. Now, a higher appetite, the rational appetite, this is going to have an enjoyment in the intellect, okay? So, yes, going to get, 4x4 animal style in and out, it's going to taste so good until the heartburn. But, that's not the same pleasure you get in, listening to a Beethoven symphony, in the hall. And please never bring a cheeseburger into a symphony, please. Please, just no. There has to be some dignity there. Okay. If maybe don't do that. Maybe an intermission. But you have that sense of delight in a higher part of the soul, rational appetite. All right. And so this pleasure, this is dealing with that rational part of the soul. Okay. So when we talk about pleasure, beauty is that which gives pleasure upon being seen. Okay, in a sense, yes, there is beauty in the rational part of the soul, that sensory appetite, taking something in with your eyeballs, your ears, beautiful music. But we also think too that beauty is something taken in with this rational appetite, okay, perceived by the intellect. Joy. Okay, so beauty can be experienced here at the sensory level, the animal soul, and rational appetite. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now, when we talk about beauty, yes, it can be for natural things. Look at the ocean, the mountains, so on and so forth. But a lot of times we talk about beauty regarding the fine arts. Art itself is a loaded term. This talk isn't so much about art, because that really is, call Mia, she's better than me with that stuff. But when we talk about beauty, it is very much, we're going to be talking about fine art at some point. But in general, art is a skill, okay? Just broadly speaking, It's a skill. Correct knowledge, knowing the skill of making things, looking at scholastic terminology. We have different types of art. I'm mainly focused on fine art, but you got the liberal arts, things about like different academic subjects, practical art, plumbing, for example, productive art, servile art. And so when we talk about art, that's a loaded term, okay? So make sure people define their terms, different senses of how it's used. That way you're not, talking past each other, okay? But when we talk about a fine art versus a practical art, you guys want to take a guess at what that difference is? Not easy. Yes.
This practical can be used for something, like say for instance, creating an illustrator that can be used for prayer. The fine art is not something that you can use, it's something that you can take pleasure in.
Very good. All right, so putting arts and crafts together, please no. Okay? And nothing against people that like to glue tongue depressors and all that, but a fine art is something that is not useful. Okay? So I like useless things. Okay? I take pleasure in things that are useless. Okay? Now we'll get to the point, it's actually not useless. People do need fine arts. Life is too difficult without fine art. And they can see it helps us in our worship and devotion to God. But a craft or practical art does have a utilitarian use, okay? So, a table that is made, you use a table, you eat on it, okay? So even if you take it to a woodworker and they're putting all these beautiful engravings on it, unless you put it in an art museum and you just look at it, it's still a practical art, it's still a craft. It can be decorative. Like, for example, my saxophone that I have has a lot of beautiful engravings on it, but it's a craft. I use it. The music that comes out of it, that's fine art, or nonsense if I'm just like, whatever. But, for the most part, it's fine art. It's something that you take aesthetic pleasure, something that you take pleasure in with your eyes, your ears. So if it's a painting, got a painting around, or sculpture, okay. St. Michael here, okay. Is he keeping the building warm or cool? Do you eat it?
No.
All right, sacrilege and weird. Okay. At the same time. No, you take a look at it and there's a delight. It's also sacramental because I assume it's blessed. All right. Now, something like the painting, St. Peter and Our Lady of Guadalupe, kind of same thing. Out in this room, we take pleasure in it. You take a look at it. So in your in your ocular senses, you take it in, wow, that's very delightful. But even in your intellect, wow, this can actually lift me up to God in heavenly things. So that's why fine art, it's not completely useless, but it's not practical, okay? So now what you'll find is that they do have some areas that get a little blurry and decorative arts. Like, for example, I love vestments. I've invested a lot in investments because I want the very best for God. But it's still a craft because I use it, I wear it. You don't wear a painting. Okay, that would be weird. You don't get any ideas. Right. Or even my chalice, it has beautiful engravings, but yet I use it. So just because something is a craft doesn't mean it's not beautiful. It just means it has utilitarian use. Now some things, like for example, I have Miss Paula who did our beautiful stained glass windows. I want her to the guild. Stained glass is actually fine art and a craft. So you do have some things that are both, but not everything's both. All right. Now to get in, we've talked about bricks, essence and existence, parts of the soul, what pleasure is, transcendentals, the categories. Okay, now we're going to get into beauty. And remind me, what is Thomas's definition of beauty? Pleasure is part of it. Very good. And seeing again. Eyes, ears, intellect. Okay. So the Thomas's 3 criteria for beauty: due proportion, clarity, integrity. All right. Start with proportion. This deals with measurements. Okay. And we know that with all 3 of these components, so God is the best example of integrity, the best example of God is integrity itself, proportion itself, clarity itself. Okay? So we see that God has integrity because he's absolutely perfect. God has due proportion or measurement because he's absolutely simple. It can't be broken down. Clarity because God is the clearest and brightest being. You know? So God is beauty itself, and even in the components of beauty, God is those things as well. Now, what Thomas does, he is taking 2 schools of thought, merging them together and gluing them with integrity. So Thomas, of course, you know, do you guys remember, or Josh, do you remember his gospel commentaries, what that book is called?
It's part of the Oscar.
The Catena.
Oh, the Catena.
Okay, Golden Chain. So he's putting all these early church fathers together and synthesizing. Really, Thomas did that for really everything. And so instead of having, yes, you should go back and read the fathers, but Thomas has a way of reading the fathers and seeing some continuity and all that. So what he's doing, and of course he's doing it even with folks that aren't the church fathers, really just with truth and knowledge itself. He took a lot from Dionysius, St. Dionysius, for beauty. Dionysius thought beauty was a name for God. But with these components, regarding proportion, he's actually taken this from Pythagoras. Okay, and so proportion is dealing with parts to wholes, deals with measurements. The clarity or radiance component he takes from Plotinus. And so we have these 2 different schools of thought about what beauty is. And Thomas would merge the 2 together and add integrity. So let's talk about proportion. So Pythagoras. So I always think of, did you guys watch Donald Duck, the math video? You know which one I'm talking about? Oh, come on. I went to public school as a kid. But, you know, I was like the last gasp of Donald Duck in mathematical land. But they talk about Pythagoras. Okay, he's the triangle guy. Okay, so Pythagorean theorem. And so Pythagoras helped a lot with music and harmony and measurements. So proportion is dealing with Pythagoras. So beauty has to primarily do with relations, one between the object itself and something else. And so even with beautiful Our Lady of Guadalupe statue, St. Michael here, okay, there are measurements, there's proportion. You know, it's just not random. Okay, and that's why we need that. And so, and you see the proportion for things in terms of like visual things. You know, we have symmetry. So when you look at how columns are made, or even look here how this room was built, that there is some proportion. Okay, the parts to the whole, how it all fits together. It's not random. Okay. So there's a symmetry there, and you see that symmetry, of course, with the Greco-Roman columns. And there's a sense, too, with proportion with harmony or hearing. Okay, so anyone who is, Isa, can you do a C major chord? Okay, and so in music, at least in Western music, you have, scales, and there's a certain relationship of how based on the tonic note, they make a major chord. So do it. Okay, so that do C to E. Right, so that's a major third. Then do C to G. All right, that's a perfect fifth. Okay, and you put them all together. Okay, and so there's a sense of proportion between those notes. There's a measurement there. Of course, and all that is based on that tonic note, that's C. And there's formulas there, whole, half, whole, half. It's been a while since music theory, but it all deals with the space between the notes, okay? And so even with different chords, there's some chords that are going to be more perfect than others, okay? And so proportion is very much something we see in the audible parts as well as the visual, okay? Now, the wonderful thing about proportion, this aspect of beauty, it is objective. It either has these certain measurements or it doesn't. So that's what's great. Oh, beauty is just subjective. No, there is objective, there's an objectivity to it. So the proportions are very important. Certain things, that get out of proportion, I saw this back going up, I know you guys get Six Flags out here, but Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, my neck of the woods, you'd always walk into the park and then there'd be an artist making like caricatures. And you see a guy and then he makes his nose like 5 times as big. And I'm like, whoa, wow, that's a big nose. And, you're drawing something way out of proportion. That's what a caricature is. Okay, but it's not, the same thing as like an actual, painting of this and then, putting the proportion is off. That's kind of also the humor of what a caricature art is. It's something blown out of proportion. But for something to have a higher degree of beauty, the proportions are going to be more precise. And again, remember, God has the best proportion. He's absolutely simple. He cannot be broken down. All right. Now, we run into an issue. Well, we've talked about measurements, okay? What do you do with concepts such as color? You can't really measure color. So this is where the whole school of radiance comes in, okay? And I'm not talking about like different shades, if something is a dark red versus light red. I'm just talking color in general. So this book Dr. Sevier writes about is that proportion cannot account for the beauty of simple, non-complex objects or experience, as in color or light. And so this gets us in the second school of thought Thomas brings up, is that of clarity. So see Plotinus here, his nose got chipped off, so missing a lot in the proportion component. Anyway, so he was a classical thinker, and he was pointing out deficiency in proportion alone. He's like, well, what about color? What about light? That's very much part of beauty. And so, to Plotinus, beauty exposes, reveals symmetry, rather than being comprised of it. Rather than symmetry kind of being in it, that the clarity is what is showing the symmetry. And so keep in mind, these ancients, again, St. Dionysius thought beauty was a name for God. So even though we're talking about people that were not, did not have the fullness of truth, there was a mystical sense of what beauty was. So keep that in mind. Okay. Now, they'll talk about is this whole idea of clarity and radiance. And so something having more being and more radiance than that. So, for example, a living person is going to have more radiance, can communicate more being. Okay, remember degrees of being. You have more being than a Venus flytrap. And don't forget it, even on your worst day. I have more being than a Venus flytrap. Okay, remember that. So, but you also have more being than a dead person, too. I mean, if you're really feeling bad, you can always remember that as well. Okay, so a living person can radiate more being than a corpse. All right. Now, let's think about that in terms of sculptures. Okay, what do you think has more being? The statue of St. Michael or Saint Michael?
Same like,
All right. So the same thing with people, like a statue of George Washington, great. But okay, let's pick someone living. Okay. Mateo, a statue of Mateo has beauty in it, it exists, but the real Mateo is, well, he can't compete with the real Mateo, okay? And so he has more being, he's radiating with being right now, more than a statue of Mateo ever would. And so this is what this whole idea of clarity does. It does talk to us too about degrees of being, and how it reveals symmetry. According to Plato, the more reality a thing has, the better it is. It's approximated to the form of the good. Remember, goodness deals with what's ideal. God is idealness itself. So the more being it has, the more goodness it has, the more truth it has. So when we talk about clarity, revealing symmetry, revealing, how much being something has, really another way to look at this is the lumen manifestans, the manifesting light, the light of reason. This light of clarity is how we see beauty, okay? And so having this clarity, this radiance is showing us the being in whatever work of art we have, in whatever natural things that exist. And so this clarity, Claudius, it solves the problem of proportion alone, because proportion doesn't have power of self-expression, okay? And so measurements are important, they're objective, but there is a self-expression part to artwork, self-expression part to being human and existing, and so both of these schools of thought are important. So what Thomas does is that he takes proportion and he takes clarity and merges them together into one school of thought and glues them together with integrity. And so this whole idea of completeness or soundness. And so integrity is closer to proportion than it is to radiance. So proportion is dealing with the parts to the whole. But integrity is saying that the parts themselves are pure. So it's one thing if it's almost like assembling, a chair and all that. Okay, it exists, there's beauty because it exists, but each of the parts, and I know this is a craft, not a fine art, but for the sake of example, imagine like each of the nails, every component in it is pure. And so what he's doing is that he's really taking proportion and clarity, and then all the parts in proportion. Those are perfect, those are pure. And that's how he's gluing these things together. But integrity is also deals with, there's a sense of completeness, really showing the perfect form of something, because you have not just the parts of the whole, but the parts themselves are perfect. So it's that might not seem as important as proportion and clarity, but the fact that he merged these two schools together with integrity is showing that we need to strive for things that are whole, that are complete, and that's good. God is integral, so as artists, we should have things that have integrity. Now, what we find is that as Thomas is talking about beauty, again, that which gives pleasure when seen, there's proportion, clarity, and integrity. As he's rather than talking about integrity, he does get into this whole idea about how when we strive for beautiful things, we end up living a beautiful life. In fact, virtue itself is quite beautiful. And so he uses this term called Honestum. And so Thomas says that spiritual beauty consists in a man's conduct or actions being well proportioned in respect to the spiritual clarity of reason. Now this is what is meant by Honestum, which you have stated to be the same as virtue, and it is virtue that moderates according to reason, all that's connected with man. Wherefore, Honestum is the same as spiritual beauty. So what it's getting at, virtue and Honestum are synonymous, because every virtue is beautiful. And if you're living a virtuous life, you have spiritual beauty in your life. That means the decisions you make have proportion. Remember, virtue is the golden mean. There's a sense of knowing what the extremes are. You have a well-proportioned life, and there's a beauty to that and living a virtuous life. And so that's why, did I put it in here? Okay, sales pitch. Okay, so for the Guild, Catholic Artists Guild, our newsletter is called Honestum, okay? Because yes, we want people to make beautiful things and see God as beauty itself, but I want you guys to live a beautiful life. I mean, live a life of Honestum, where you want to live a virtuous life. You have proportion and clarity in your life. And so we're hoping that the beautiful art that is made, whether it's something explicitly Catholic or even for stuff, if someone is not doing something directly religious, that it is at the very least virtuous and it has a sense of Honestum. All right. Now, you go into, remember, Thomas doesn't directly say beauty is a transcendental, at least at the same level. But he does basically say that they're identical fundamentally, but it deals with that sense of appetite. So they differ in logic. Okay, so Thomas says, goodness properly relates to appetite, and therefore it has an aspect of an end. On the other hand, beauty relates to the cognitive faculty, your beautiful things which unseen. Okay, so this is dealing with kind of more of an intellectual pleasure, okay, is what he's getting at. Now, to go into whether beauty is its own transcendental, that is a whole other topic for another time. I will say I was very impressed with Jacques Maritain's Art and Scholasticism, where he basically makes the argument beauty is a transcendental. That's basically where I lean, because it'd be very hard to be doing what I'm doing, and I didn't think beauty was a transcendental. But Father has a lot of homework to do before he speaks publicly about these things. But what I can do is share a little bit about what I know about this. But it was definitely after Thomas's life that the whole idea of beauty as its own transcendental gained some momentum. What I can say, so with all the transcendentals, remember that they're synonymous with one another, but Thomas views being, okay, existence, as the primary transcendental. So in other words, truth, goodness, thing, and something are secondary. Beauty would be a conceptual addition to goodness. Think of it as an aspect of goodness. So yes, whatever you say of beauty is true, good, it's a thing, something, but Thomas very much saw goodness and beauty together, and he really didn't want to separate those. But what we can say, and I also don't want to put words in Thomas's mouth, we have what we have, and we'll find out in heaven, what we need to know. What does matter is beauty is convertible with goodness, truth, so on and so forth. Now that being said, remember, God is goodness itself, truth itself. He is being itself. Everything that exists shares in being. Okay, everything that exists shares in goodness. Everything that exists shares in truth. So there's degrees. So just as there's degrees of being, yes, I am greater than a Venus flytrap. Yes, I am greater than a cat or dog or whatever, fill in the blank animal. Okay, there's degrees of being there. There are degrees of beauty. So keep that in mind. So especially beauty, so it's just subjective and I beholder, really looking at Thomas and what transcendentals are, think of things more in degrees. rather than something that doesn't have any beauty at all. Some things are more beautiful than others. Of course, God is beauty itself. All right. Now to talk a little bit about what Thomas says about art. Again, that itself can be a whole other course. We do need to apply proportion, clarity, and integrity into the fine arts. All right. So there's actually a great video on the Aquinas 101, the Dominicans in St. Joseph province, about art and virtue. So that's worth looking at, and they have illustrations. And so Thomas would say, basically playing an instrument, sawing a piece of, a carpenter, they're putting a table together, that it's all art, okay, it's all skill. Thomas saw art as a production. It's something that you make. And so, now Thomas was very much aware of, he took a lot from Aristotle, even though we wouldn't agree on everything regarding art. Of course, Aristotle wrote a lot about art, he wrote about poetry. Thomas didn't think as highly, but obviously it's something that is addressed somewhat. So he knew that there was a difference between, a general technique of the practical arts and crafts, and mimetic or imitation, fine arts. That's kind of what our guild is. That is what our guild focuses on, is fine arts, things that imitate nature. And so you talk about art imitating nature and its mode of operation and how it does. So basically, nature is basically essence and action. So a dog, is acting according to its nature when it sees the mailman go by. So that's what dogs do. Or to see a squirrel. That's just what dogs do. That's what they are, essence in action, nature. Okay. Now, everything that is produced, so again, Thomas saw art as a production. Okay, you're not creating. Okay, God alone creates. Okay, in the beginning, okay, he created heavens and the earth. Okay, ex nihilo. Okay, out of nothing. Okay, you can't make matter. Okay, so even the form of something, that didn't come out of thin air. God, the form and all that goes back to God too. Okay, so as an artist, okay, you're really there as a secondary cause, putting matter. Aristotle would also lean to, Thomas would be relying on Aristotle for his thought about art, matter and form together, hylomorphism. Okay, and that's very important too. Is sacraments, matter and form. Okay. You can have a pile of wood, but if you don't have a concept of what a table is, I don't know what you're going to make. But even this idea of the form where you get it, that can be credited to God. That's not your original idea. So all type of artwork is an imitation. It's not as rich as nature. And so there's another term regarding poetry as an art form. Thomas used the phrase, I believe it's the infirma doctrina, the weak doctrine. So yes, you can learn something from poetry, but it's like the weakest form of knowledge. All right? It's like, ooh, ouch. It's like, oh, what are you doing? Now, granted, of course, I think now after Thomas, we can see that distinction between practical art and fine arts is very important. But rather than getting upset, oh, well, why wasn't, poetry or art, lifted to a high level? Why did I take Thomas Aquinas as our patron saint for the guild? It's because art is still a product, okay? what happened, and yes, as an artist, when you're making something, and again, another reason I went with Thomas is he uses the language of making. And even Jacques Maritain in Art and Scholasticism uses that language of making and leaving creating to God. Okay, and so even in a sense, when we talk about the creative arts, really it's, as a Thomist, you have to be like, not everyone's a Thomist, all right, move on. And then you have to say, okay, it's a secondary cause. That's what it means in the creative arts, secondary causation. All right, so, well, basically what happened after Thomas's time is there was more emphasis on the artist rather than the art. So even though he would see carpentry and playing the flute as both art, you know, there's a product there, okay? Well, what is let's say doing a painting or something, okay? What is the quality of that artwork? Rather than, oh, I feel so much better. Yeah, there is self-expression. It is objective that the subjective exists, but things have to be rightly ordered. Now, what happened after Thomas's time, you'd eventually have where things got inner, focused more on the person. And you can look today. Now, I don't like it when people say all modern art is bad, because that's not true. It's just a lot of it is. All right. And then, so the word modern doesn't mean bad. It's just sometimes there's a lot of modern things that are bad. And so, that being said, part of what the Guild is here to do is help apply these principles. You know, because we need to have principles in our life. If you don't have principles in your life, that's very dangerous. Now, it can also be dangerous when you misapply principles in your life. And another reason to have the Guild is how we apply these in a reasonable way. All right. So, why should we apply proportion, clarity, and integrity to art? Well, okay. When we strive to have beautiful things, we're going to have a beautiful life of virtue. Okay. So when you're taking the time, you know, as an artist, to have proportion and measurement, you know, have some sense of radiance, clarity of reason in the artwork you're making, and all the parts have integrity. Do I have an integrity in my life? Do I have proportion in my life? Am I being reasonable in my life? Okay, so it's much more than the artwork itself. It really helps you turn your life around. So that's what we want to do in the Guild, is have a culture of honestum. All right, now we all know C is for cookie. It's good enough for me. But it's very easy when we take these principles and then we get so dogmatic about it. Well, everything has to have proportion, and then everything has to have radiance, and then integrity. And I'm like, okay, Thomas didn't just give like a whole encyclopedia of examples. Okay, these are principles that need to be applied. Okay, not everything's going to be this cookie cutter image. Okay, and you're human. There will be some disagreements on how these principles are applied. So yes, there's some wiggle room with what, and this is what I like with Professor Dr. Daniel McInerny, who teaches at Christendom College in Virginia. And so I was reading this book during my retreat last month, and wow, reading it, and even just reading it at the Holy Hour at our seminary chapel, and with beauty itself, or Lord in the monstrance, it's like beauty. I mean, it's awesome. But what I like about this book, so I kind of just went in and was like, okay, here's the components of beauty. What Professor McInerny does is he goes through the first third of the book. He's talking about mimesis, imitation. Okay, remember, fine art is an imitation. You know, it's not it's not creative. Only God is the creator. We make things. It's an imitation of other things that exist. All right. And then he goes into these components of beauty. So yes, beauty is objective. But he does bring up the whole idea of what about the subject. It's very easy to say, well, beauty is just in the eye of the beholder and everything's about taste. Now, there's an element of taste, but not the whole concept of beauty, for sure. All right, so what are some realities that we deal with when someone is like, okay, that is not beautiful, objectively that's not beautiful, I don't know what you ate, but that's not beautiful, okay. What are some things? So according to Dr. McInerny, the perfection and harmony of a work does not make a good first impression. All right. First impressions always last. You might not know the compositional form, okay? So maybe when you get, and I find this too, you know, I have a background in classical concert saxophone. What I find, because we live in a culture, most people are just used to pop music, that I have to give an explanation of the piece beforehand, and it actually helps people understand the piece better, the compositional form. And so that's something as an artist is, it doesn't hurt to give an explanation. Or, you know, with film, if you give an explanation before the film of kind of what is the compositional style, what is the proportion I went for, you know, all these other components of beauty. So you might not get a good first impression right away. Doing your own research into something. Now the whole idea is you shouldn't have to like squint and, you know, jump off a cliff to understand what something means. Like some stuff does get complicated. But yeah, some of the reasons for the subjective, you might not understand the compositional form at first. Okay. Not everyone may grasp the compositional form. Someone might see it and another person doesn't. Right? Does that mean it's perfectly subjective? Well, again, like if you live in a culture, if everyone just listens to, you know, very just primitive bubblegum pop music, you know, and that's all they have, you know, and there's nothing deep. Well, how can they, you know, really understand something that's deep? And I'm not here to insult people's intelligence, but some people haven't been really introduced to great works of art. Okay, but that's why art appreciation, music appreciation, all that's sort of important. Okay, now this one I find interesting is the viewer of the art actually might find something that the artist themselves didn't intend. I'm like, that's pretty cool. You make something so good that somebody else finds something else, and huh, that's neat. Then finally, basically, there's no dispute in matter of taste. Okay, you're going to have an element, you know, what Dr. McInerny talks about, look, if you like Shakespeare's tragedies more than his comedies, great. All right, cool. Okay, if you like Beethoven's Ninth more than his Eighth Symphony, all right. I would agree that Ninth is better, but you know, the point is that there is room, you know, for disagreeing, but not to, that doesn't mean we lose the principles of proportion, clarity, and integrity. Now, if something doesn't really, let's just say it is difficult to see the proportion. It's difficult to see the clarity and integrity. Again, remember, if something has being, it's good, it's true. If something exists, it is beautiful. So the way I handle, you know, because I know a lot of people, I came from a conservatory before seminary. Yeah, a lot of people in the arts, yeah, they come from, you know, there's a very sensitive disposition that they have. But a lot of that sensitivity is then brought into the artwork, and you know, some art might be a way of coping with trauma and other difficult things. But rather than just saying outright, hey, this is ugly, you know, hey, there's some beauty here, okay? And there's some proportion, there's some clarity, there's some integrity. But in time, work with people, hey, let's, you know, hey, God is beauty itself. God is the most proportion, clarity, and integrity. Let's work on having some more richer art. And so it's a way of meeting people where they're at. and acknowledging what's there, but also like, hey, we really need to strive for, higher forms of art, especially when we can have a life of honestum. When we have more proportion, clarity, integrity in our life, or excuse me, in our art, that means we're going to have that in our life, have a life of honestum. All right, so the good thing is that you don't have to look far for an organization that does all this. So, I get a drum roll. All right, Catholic Artists Guild. So, Catholic Artists Guild, our motto is Ars ad gloriam Dei, art for the glory of God. We focus on the 7 main types of fine art. We got music, literature, sculpture, film, theater, painting, and architecture, all surrounding the cross, instrument of our salvation. So we want to make sure that we are evangelizing people, bringing them into the church through the arts, but it's also a way for us here in Catholic culture to foster an appreciation for the arts. It's not just, hey, we have all these beautiful music, vestments, metal work, every paintings and things. Okay, then it's like, oh, I never want to go to a concert. I never want to go to an art museum. But we have beautiful things here. That needs to flow from the liturgy into your life. So that's part of what I'm going to be talking about at the parish fair on Saturday. Everything that flows from the liturgy needs to flow into your life. Okay, beautiful things in liturgy, beautiful things in your life. Now, we do have public events that the Guild does, like we did the talent show. We're showing Sound of Music on Saturday. I'm doing a concert July 21st. Isa is doing a concert, a very humbling concert in August. Okay, so we have public events, but we also have some Guild member-only events, such as workshops for storytelling. We're going to do a cigar and poetry night. We're going to have, and since I'm also the chaplain for the Guild, there's going to be a day of recollection for artists on March 7th. So those are things only open for Guild members. I'm also working on the Guild to get some type of grant system. So if you're working on some type of fine art project, we're going to see if we can give a little bit of money toward that. Also, it's a way of networking with other Catholic artists to showcase your talent, but also too to help find work, morally sound work. So hey, I need an artist. Hey, I need someone to paint this. I need someone to compose. I'm doing a film. I need someone to compose music for it. Okay, you're going to have that network and know that you're dealing with people that have the same faith. So I think that's very important. You don't have to compromise your Catholic faith. And if you're making some type of composition, new artwork, you can have us review it and we can endorse it for you. So a lot of benefits. So we have this wonderful QR code, so you can take your smartphone and register for the Guild. It's $50 to be an active member for a year membership, $25 as an associate member. You can do the least expensive route and just sign up for the newsletter. But I encourage you, if you have, even if you're not an artist, you have an appreciation, even just going for that associate membership can go a long way. So anyway, that's my talk.